Thank you very much for joining with us in this Gobeshona session. Here we have Dilrupa Appa, we have Fazil Rabi sir, and we have Shaheen Appa and Bonasriti with us. Today, I would like to thank all of the panelists and guests from Manusher Jonno Foundation, and want to hand it over to Shaheen Appa for next course of action. Thank you.
Video. Good afternoon. This is Shaheen Anam. I should start my video.
You cannot actually. The host only can do this. Tanmay, Asan.
I'm not being able to open my video. You people have done something. You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Tanmay?
No, আমি তো co-host হচ্ছে আসান ভাই।
ঠিক আছে, I will do it without হ্যাঁ আমি তো করতে পারছি না, আপনারা কিছু করেছেন বোধহয়, but I cannot unmute it. I cannot unmute myself. I cannot open my video because it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. কিছু বলবেন আপনারা?
আপা ও যে আইক্যাট তো হোস্ট করছে, ওনারা অফ করে রেখেছে।
শুনেন, আমি একটু কথা বলছি আপা।
জি আপা।
হ্যাঁ, আমি শুরু করব?
না, একটু অপেক্ষা করেন, ওনারা দিচ্ছে।
আমাকে প্লিজ একটু মেসেজ চ্যাটে তো দিতে পারো তোমরা, আমি তো জানি না এটা।
আপা ওনারা করে দিচ্ছে আইক্যাট থেকে।
আচ্ছা, হ্যালো।
Yes.
We have promoted you to a co-host. You can share your screen now.
It's okay. I can start without the video. Should I?
আপা আইকেট থেকে কে আছেন? ওনারা আসলে ওই আপা আসলে আপার ভিডিও স্টার্ট করতে যাচ্ছেন কিন্তু
এটা কেউ পারবে না।
আচ্ছা, never mind, please. Never mind. Let me start the discussion. It's okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Global Gobeshona Conference number 3. The session today is Climate Change Impact on Human Rights, an analytical cases from Bangladesh. As we all know, it's a very, very important issue, which is, I think, which is largely ignored. We talk about the physical impacts of climate change, of buildings being destroyed, housing, livelihoods, and other aspects of life being destroyed. But we seldom talk about how the climate change has impacts on the human rights of people. Human rights, as we all know, is universal. It is indivisible. It is inherent. Every person has human rights as soon as they are born, which is clearly said in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And for that reason, every aspect of human rights, such as the fundamental and basic rights, needs to be protected by the state. The civil society also, of course, has a very important role to play to make sure that the climate vulnerable, the people living in the climate vulnerable areas, their human rights are protected. We see that in Bangladesh and in most other places that women's human rights are uniquely impacted by the negative impacts of climate change. And we find that very, very difficult to kind of address human rights such as violence against women and girls, human rights violations such as early marriage, and then many kinds of human rights are violated due to poverty, due to their vulnerability. Today, we are going to talk about the special vulnerabilities that the human rights violations that people living in climate vulnerable areas face, especially on women. A few days ago, I also attended another such meeting organized by CPDR, and we were all talking about similar issues. Dilruba from the UN Women was also there, where we talked about that even if you restore the livelihoods of people, even if you build their houses, but to protect human rights, we need some very specific intervention. But more important than that, I think it is critical to realize that the violation of human rights impacts on every aspect of a person's lives. And as I said before, that it has a very strong gender dimension. So today we are going to look at some of the cases that we have, the evidence that we have gathered due to the work that we have been doing on climate change adaptation in the last 5 years. So without much delay, I would like to request Bonusri Mitrun Neogi. She is the Director Programs at MJF at Manusher Jonno Foundation, and she's going to make a presentation on climate change impact on human rights, analytical cases from Bangladesh. So Bonusri, please make your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Appa. Asan, would you please share the PowerPoint? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Appa. And I'm also welcoming Dilruba Appa and Fazlur Rabbi Bhai for joining as panelists today. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Bangladesh. I hope our climate actors,
I think you have to speak a little louder or bring your microphone closer to your mouth. Yes.
Just closer,
yes,
I think.
It's fine.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon again. I'm saying, I hope our climate actors, fighters join with us from different area of country and also area of different globe. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm going to share our organization, Manusher Jonno Foundation project experience and learnings from the human rights perspective of climate change impact. And I will also share a few case stories from Bangladesh. Before going to the presentation, I must express my deep appreciation to the downstream partners, those who played a key role, and my colleagues, those who captured the learnings from the ground. In the second slide, actually, we just put the situation. It is very known to all of us. Every country and states have human rights obligation to prevent the foreseeable adverse effects of climate change and ensure those affected by it, particularly vulnerable situations, access lives of human dignity. So it is very important from human rights perspective. In our third slide, I want to make sure that here is we have MJF commitment and core principle as Manusher Jonno Foundation promote human rights and governance issue. So the core principles of Manusher Jonno Foundation, the inclusiveness and equality, respect for diversity, transparency and accountability, gender sensitivity. At the same time, the work approach MJ follow for all the projects, not only the climate change related projects, the human rights based approach, follow the socio-ecological framework, gender equality and social inclusion, and transformative gender approach. So these are the MJF commitment approach and core principle. So which human rights are most affected by climate change? There are a list of area of rights like right to life, self-determination existence, development, health, food, water and sanitation, to adequate housing, education, meaningful and informed participation, future generation. All the rights of those most affected by climate change. So It is also true that why human rights perspective need to integrate in climate-related actions. First of all, it is the essential obligation and responsibility of rights. As Manusher Jonno Foundation promotes human rights, so we have to create pressure on the government to ensure the all human rights and at the same time, award the people, it's your rights, claim the rights from the service providers. So because the human rights are the universal legal guarantee that protect individuals. It is also true that climate change is the greatest threat to human rights, as already our executive director shared that, because this posing serious risk of fundamental rights to life, as I mentioned earlier. And it is definitely not merely an abstract, it is now reality. It is not the future possibility, because the climate change is already contributing to drought, ecosystem degradation, and food storage in our country, not only in our country, across the world. Even in some areas in Bangladesh, the heat harder than other areas in the shore areas mostly. So with more clearly attributes linkage to climate change, there are so many reasons, maybe scientific reasons, like we are used to say the sea levels rise adversely, and also the affected safety, security, livelihood, and also the many coastal inhabitants that facing the high temperature, causing significant changes in the ecosystem that support to the indigenous communities. Whenever we talked about the right-based approach, MJF strongly believed that there should be integrate any climate change adaptation or mitigation measures, so that everyone can ensure their rights and exercise their rights in that way. I'm not giving much on that issue because it is internationally agreed, and Bangladesh government also agreed about that. In the fourth slide, we put some information about the project, what case we are going to share with all of you. The project name is the Strengthening Civil Society and Public Institutions to Address Gender-Based Violence and Build Community Resilience to Adapt Climate Change Adaptation. Please bring the PowerPoint again, Hassan. It has gone.
It is not moving. I'm trying to fix it.
Next one. Next one, the project brief. Go to the project brief slide.
It is not moving. I'm trying to fix it.
Okay.
Can you share it from your side? I'm trying
in that
again.
case, I have to go again. So I think, Hassan, you skip that slide and go next one.
Okay.
Isn't working?
I'm trying. Is it? সমস্যা তৈরি করছে।
Okay, I'm moving, you try. Okay, so we started the project in 2016, and we just ended up the first phase in August 2022, and after the completion of the first phase, we started the second phase in September 2022. So this actually, it is not beyond dispute that climate change caused by human activity has negative impact of the full enjoyment of human rights. The human rights framework MJF is following also requires the efforts from the local, actually micro to meso and macro. After that, the global efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change should be guided by relevant human rights norms and principles, including the rights to participation and information, transparency, accountability, equity, and non-discrimination. Simply put, climate change is a human rights problem, and the human rights framework must be part of the solution. Then next slide, we come for the locally led adaptation. We all are very clear that locally led adaptation have 8 principles. So we try to focus here on the 8 principles, based on the 8 principles, how MJF is going through the 8 principle. Like first principle is devolving decisions making and lowest appropriate level. From MJF side, okay, give it the slide mode. Slide sharing, Hassan. Okay, bring all of them at a time. Okay, thank you. It is very common for all of us, especially those who are panelists here today. So we try to put some results underneath the principles because we are very new in this field, and only the 4 years result we try to put here. In 430 village-based adaptation plan developed and 310 endorsed by local government institutions, so that the local level participation ensured and they can also make their own plan. And second principle, addressing the structural inequalities. The structural inequalities, mainly we try to put here some advocacy program research, and also we try to build women leadership. And based on that, 172 grassroots women climate actors scoped in the Upazila Disaster Management Committee and Union Disaster Management Committee. And at the same time, we try to engage different intersection vulnerable women and girls so that they can engage in their whole planning and challenge the structural inequalities, and few of them now better equipped to challenge the structural inequalities to bring towards the gender equality. Third one, we try to involve the community and also the women. We always try to get information so that they can easily access the finance resource, and they can build their community fund and manage by their own. And 247 women group managing the fund based on priority and demand. And each and every group contains 30 members. Fourth one is the investing local capabilities. Through this project, we try to build capacity of Union Parishad on climate change, DRR, and gender-based violence issue. 872 representatives from service providers receiving training on climate change, DRR, and gender. And next slide, please. The other 4 is building a robust understanding on climate risk and uncertainty. Here, we mainly try to make awareness of community and other stakeholders on climate change and adaptation, and also the early warning climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. The flexible programming and learning, actually after the midterm evaluation, we try to reorganize, redesign our program and project, and we revised based on the ground reality, so that we also address the specific context and vulnerability, and realign our budget, realign our milestones, and realign also our program design in the middle of the project. So we always, based on our learnings, we try to make more comprehensive programming. 7.1 is ensuring transparency, accountability. This is one of the social accountability tools for enhancing transparency, accountability of service providers. After using the social accountability tools, mainly followed the community scorecard, citizen charter, sitting, interface meeting, and also the what another one, public hearing. So based on that, 18,735 climate vulnerable rights holders received services from different service providing institutions by raising their voice and claiming rights. So these all are based on the right-based approach and the results of these areas. There are some few pictures. And then next one, the gender impact. So it also found that the involvement of women in agriculture remains systematically unrecognized and unreported, resulting in lower wages and limited access to credit, agriculture extension services, technologies, markets, everything same in other areas. Besides the limited land ownership, rights of women and girls' contribution to low decision-making power. And it is not only the agriculture issue, the agriculture, water resource management, forestry, decision-making process. So we try to give another effort and take another approach, the transformative gender approach we designed for our next phase, which is just started in September 2002, where the programs and interventions that creates opportunities for individuals to actively challenge gender norms, promote positions of social political influences for women in communities, and address power inequalities between person and different genders. So this is also differently we designed our next phase. Next slide for the livelihood, I think. Go next slide. Yes. So the impacts we have shown from the last phase results. Around 97% beneficiaries agreed that their monthly income has increased in comparison to 2016 when the project started. And at the same time, the loan distribution, 94% beneficiaries took. These actually, these all results we shared from our end evaluation of the project, where 82% of the loan distributed among women beneficiaries. 93 beneficiaries reported IGF fund helped them in covering COVID shock. Next slide. Okay. So these are the pictures of our livelihood programs, and we have seen that women climate actors can do anything if they get the chance to do work and to do for the society and their family also. Here are some cases, actually very brief of our project results we try to mention here, like that. These are the boys, click another one. The voices are in actions. The community people, women raised their voice, and especially the Water Development Board reactivated the 3-kilometer canal against demand raised by the community in the risk reduction plan. What is I already mentioned in my previous slide, where more than 2,400 people were suffered from the water scarcity for a long time. But based on their voice, the Water Development re-excavated the canal. And after that, their agricultural land became more fertile. Another one is a 2-kilometer embankment, also Union Parishad through the community's scorecard results incorporated in their plan. And finally, Water Development Board also completed the task, 2 kilometers of embankment. And there are two other women in the top, in the bottom we have found. One is from the Patuakhali area. She helped 23 women to get seed and 12 women to receive from the Department of Agriculture Extension so that they can do agriculture by their own, even to get entered in the VGD and maternity allowance for in 3 years. So these are the results from the grassroots, and now they are doing by their own. The project is facilitate the whole process, and they become more powerful, and they can raise their voice. They can do something for their community. You can go for last slide. I am not taking much time on this slide. Go for the project challenge, Hassan. there are 2 more slides. You can skip that slide. Next slide, please go.
Can you see this? Can you see this?
Next slide. So these are basically project limitations and challenges. It is very common. Maybe all other partners and all other INGOs are also facing the same. The climate change is not only environmental challenge, it is become a deepening human development challenge of Bangladesh. And also the unavailability of government service provider representation at the local level, especially the public institutions. Many officers are assigned in additional charges in most remote climate vulnerable areas due to maybe some practical reasons, but the local people cannot get the services. And even the appropriate resource allocation is also concerns based on their demand, because the allocation is very poor and the demand is high. And insufficient financial support, less access to government loan, information, literacy, everything is common in our all areas, like maybe other organizations also. Another one, we have learned that well-planned sexual and reproductive health rights are essential for gender equality and climate action. And non-investment in care sector, that their household care work burden is high. Next slide, please. So these are the learnings from the remote coastal chor and hill areas of Bangladesh. I think it is also very similar to others. It is essential to take holistic approach. We always say holistic approaches give better results to enhance the resilience and climate vulnerable communities. It is also true that the implementation of social accountability tools and if it give us effective results to enhance the duty bearers' accountability and responsiveness. And the community engagement in local level planning and decision-making process creates ownership among them and enhance their responsibility during implementation. So need to scale up the community engagement. So we are try to deepen our community engagement in our current phase. And grassroots women are strong climate actors and adapt climate resilience quickly. So more women engagement is also important. And we have also found that gender-based data is must for proper planning and budgeting. It is applicable for all sectors of stakeholders, government, NGOs, even local government. So we have very poor data and we don't have any appropriate data. Sometimes we need some research to make the strong policies on climate change and gender equality. And implementation of these policies is also very important from our learnings. We have lots of policies related to climate change and even gender, but gap remains in implementation level. We are very close, but from MJF side, I must say something on analytical perspective. Because in our learnings, climate justice and climate change are cross-cutting issues and require multi-sectoral approach in line with leaving no one behind. At the same time, inclusion of affected communities in finding solution is key to sustainable solutions. It is also important, I want to mention here very strongly. The Manusher Jonno Foundation project has able to create significant changes among communities in relation to their knowledge, capacity, proactive actions, despite having hurdles due to the coherence of extreme climate events like frequent cyclone. During this period, our local people faced 5 times of cyclones in their project period, prolonged flood, flash flood, and landslide in the Chirong Hill tracts. Even the whole project period, the COVID pandemic is also creating some barriers to implement the project. But it is the project we try to holistic development communities by changing their mindset, improving accountability and responsive supply side, and improving understanding as well as courage to take proactive action by the demand side. So I'm stop my presentation here. I think I will come back again if there is any questions or other clarifications. Thank you for giving me the time. Maybe I'm taking more time. Thank you. China, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bonusri. As I said before, that Bonusri was speaking from real life experience of our experience of implementing the 5-year projects on adaptation and how people have coped and sustained themselves, and the courage that they have shown and the resilience also to adapt to the climate change impacts and also to overcome those. However, the issue of human rights remains very high on the agenda, and we should all think about it. I'm very pleased to now invite Dilruba Haider, Program Specialist, Climate Change, DRR, and Humanitarian Action from UN Women. She's a discussant, a panel discussant. Dilruba, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ainapa. And thank you, Bonusri, for a very good presentation. You have rightly said, Shainapa, that you and I, we were in another event last week, and there in that meeting, we did say that whatever that study, there was a study presentation, and we said that whatever the study presented, there wasn't anything new. We all knew about it. But nevertheless, we have to keep on saying the same things again and again, because it's very important for reminding the people who are engaged into climate change programs, adaptation mitigation, resilience building, disaster risk reduction, to remember and understand and internalize the fact that it's extremely important to address the gender differential risks and needs of men and women and the other marginalized groups. So the issue about the human rights and gender justice and rights, these are so very interconnected. Human rights is, the rights of people. And we know that because of the socioeconomic and cultural differences, the realities of men and women in our society is very different. So therefore, the risks which are being perceived by men and women from the same flood is very different. In Kurigram, I remember in 2020, December, when we went there was a UN mission led by the UN resident coordinator, and some of us went to Kurigram. If you remember, in 2020, there was a very big flood, and amidst the pandemic crisis. And when we talked with the government officials, with the community people, everybody said, yeah, livelihood is very important. We need livelihood recovery. There isn't any money available. There isn't any job. Everything is going up. The prices are going up. And then when we talked with the women, they said the same thing, but they also said that, each time there was flood, we had to spend sleepless nights, night after night, because we were worried about the safety and security of our adolescent girls. This wasn't necessarily true for the fathers or the brothers, because they are also worried about their girls, but the sleepless nights were the nights of the mothers. When everybody were taking shelter on the embankments, repeatedly. And if you remember, in 2020, there were, I think, 4 spells of flooding in the same season. And each time these families had, numbers of hundreds of families had to move to embankments, high embankments, to take shelter. And on the shelter in the open, the women had to, protect, think of, worry about the safety and security of their adolescent girls. Also, in terms of the safety and security, like women are very reluctant to go to flood shelters, mainly because there isn't any toilet facility. In cyclone shelters, the newly built ones, the government has made sure that there are adequate number of, toilets. But even there, because of the way it's being built, in most cases, what happens is there are, in the cyclone shelters, there are 6, 7, or 4, 5, toilets. But these are all in the same row. So the women, they feel reluctant to use those toilets where in the next door toilet, the men are using. And these are probably the men think, what the heck? These are designated for you, the women, go and use it. But women, because of the sensitivities, because of the cultural things, because of the way women behave and feel, they don't feel comfortable going to a toilet where just beside her toilet there's another toilet where men are going. But still, there are toilets in cyclone shelters. But in flood shelters, there aren't any, toilet facilities. So the women are very reluctant to go to the, flood shelters. So these are the kinds of things that, the differences. And I have heard numbers of times government officials complaining that, these women, they don't want to go to shelters. We have to drag them. We have to force them to come to the shelters. But they don't necessarily realize why the women are reluctant to go to the shelters. It's because they are afraid of their safety and security. They're afraid of the safety and security of their adolescent girls. And, jokingly, I have heard government officials saying, these women, they don't want to go to shelters for their 2 chickens and, 1 goat. But we probably fail to realize that 2 chicken and 1 goat is a means of that woman's, own, feeling of independence, feeling of asset, having some asset that she can call her own. The broader society probably don't necessarily understand that. So just to say that, there are actually difference of perception of risk between men and women and with other, marginalized groups. The transgender groups, they are seldom, allowed to enter cyclone shelters or any shelter for that matter. The sex workers, they are nowhere. They when their brothels are being washed away, they have nowhere to go. So these marginalized groups, are we necessarily thinking about how to support these marginalized groups to survive during a disaster or prepare for the eventualities of disasters? The gender-based violence, in all the conversations and discussions of adaptation, of disaster preparedness, we don't necessarily give any focus on gender-based violence, which is actually critical. And we all know, I remember during COVID, in 2020, Manusher Jonno Foundation has been bringing out these updates on the violence, and we saw the horrendous stories, the numbers of violence going like shot like anything during the first few months. So when we prepare ourselves or we design strategies to protect the communities at risk, we have to think about the GBV. And the women's leadership, I mean, this is critical because women, I mean, we have seen that each time we have given the leadership in the hands of the women, let the women lead the way, we have been successful. Be it, you know, the microcredit, story of microcredit in this country, be it social forestry, you know, be it the, you know, oral saline. It has always been the success story of women who have led the way, who have led our stride towards success of these developmental gains. So we have to ensure women's leadership in locally led adaptation, because it is when we are talking about locally led, so local community has to lead this. And because of the history of our development, women being the champions of change and leading the developmental stride in the country, we need to recognize and let the women lead our stride towards locally led adaptation. Also, and not just in adaptation, but also mitigation. When we talk about mitigation, we talk about, you know, inevitably solar home system. We have been talking about for decades the improved cooking stove. But in all these cases, we have considered women as the beneficiaries, not necessarily as leaders, which I think it has been the missing link. Women, we should have taught women to be the entrepreneurs for solar home system. We should have, you know, built women's capacity as the masons, as the technicians for both, you know, the solar home system as well as the improved cooking stoves. So we need to bring them into the leadership position. In UN Women, we have been, together with UNEP, we have been implementing a project, regional project. In one of those, in one of the components of that project, we have been working with women entrepreneurs on solar technology. And we have, this has been done in a very small way, in a couple of districts, but there has been some very interesting developments. So I would think that I mean, we really need to focus on women's leadership in both climate change adaptation, locally led adaptation, and of course also on climate mitigation interventions. And finally, livelihoods. It's critical that we design and implement some livelihood programs for women which are resilient to the climatic shocks. I mean, we have heard stories. In fact, within our own project, we have heard women saying that when the flood comes in, who do I take? Do I take my 2 goats or my children and run? So probably goats and chickens wouldn't do, especially in the climate hotspots. We need to think about some different kinds of livelihoods, introduce some different kinds of livelihoods for the women to pursue. We have done in UN Women some studies on options of livelihoods. So we now need to take those up. And it's not just Manusher Jonno Foundation or UN Women, it has to be the government who needs to lead on these, introducing these new types of livelihoods for women. The Ministry of Women and Children Affairs, we know, have training institutes for women's livelihoods. All these different kinds of and new kinds of and resilient kinds of livelihood options should be introduced in those training centers for the women to take up those options. I'll stop there. Thank you so very much for letting me talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diluba, for bringing up such pertinent issues to our attention. It is true, as we have always said, that women face unique, challenges in climate vulnerable areas, and things like they don't want to go to shelters because of the insecurity, lack of sanitation or sanitary facilities or toilets and things like that, and also just the fear they have of losing everything when they come back. So all those things are important. And you also mentioned of course, the resilience of people, which Bonusri also, brought out very well in her presentation, that in spite of everything, people are somehow being able to cope. But most importantly, the state has to ensure the protection of human rights of everyone, especially of marginalized people, especially of particularly vulnerable people, like young girls, like children, like people with disabilities. They need special attention. So thank you, Dilruba, for your intervention. I would like to say that there will be a question answer session, and I'm requesting everyone to put their questions in the chat box. Okay, so now we have a video documentary which will be presented by Wasir Rahman Tanmoy from MJF and also Noor Ilahi from ICAT. So without much ado, Tanmoy.
Yes, sir.
Tanmoy, who's going first? I don't know. Tanmoy or Noor Ilahi, but please make your video presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Appa.
Thank you.
জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রত্যক্ষ ও পরোক্ষ প্রভাবেও বিপন্ন হচ্ছে নারী। উপকূলে কৃষি জমি বেশিরভাগ সময় সামুদ্রিক নোনা জলে থাকছে, ফলে ফসলি জমি হারাচ্ছে তার উর্বরতা। সাইক্লোনের সংখ্যা প্রতি বছর বৃদ্ধি পাচ্ছে। উত্তরাঞ্চলে অতিবৃষ্টি এবং আকস্মিক বন্যায় প্লাবিত হচ্ছে গোটা জনপদ। পার্বত্য অঞ্চলেও বাড়ছে পাহাড়ি ধসের সংখ্যা। ফলে প্রতি বছর ঘটছে প্রাণহানির ঘটনা এবং মানুষ হারাচ্ছে বসতবাড়ি। বলা যায় এর কারণ হলো বৈশ্বিক উষ্ণতা বৃদ্ধি এবং জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রত্যক্ষ প্রভাব।
সুইডিশ সরকারের অনুদানে মানুষের জন্য ফাউন্ডেশন একটি 5 বছর মেয়াদী প্রকল্প হাতে নিয়েছে, যেটার মূল কতগুলো কম্পোনেন্ট আছে। একটি হলো জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের যে নেগেটিভ ইম্প্যাক্টগুলো সেগুলো অ্যাড্রেস করা, নারীর প্রতি সহিংসতা রোধ করা, এবং শুধু বাড়িতে না, ঘরে বাইরে এবং বিশেষ করে সে তার কর্মস্থলে। আরেকটি হলো যে এই যে আমাদের স্থানীয় সরকার, তাদের একটা দক্ষতা বৃদ্ধি করা। আরেকটা হলো যেটার জন্য মানুষের জন্য ফাউন্ডেশন বিখ্যাত, সেটা হলো যে দক্ষতা বৃদ্ধি করা যত রকমের স্টেক হোল্ডার্স আছে সবাই।
প্রকল্পের অন্তর্গত প্রত্যেকটি দুর্যোগপ্রবণ এলাকায় হতদরিদ্র নারীদের নিয়ে একাধিক দল গঠন করা হয়। উদ্দেশ্য হল সদস্যদের জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রভাব, দুর্যোগ পূর্ব প্রস্তুতি এবং দুর্যোগোত্তর সময়ে করণীয় বিষয়গুলো সম্পর্কে নারীদেরকে সচেতন করে তোলা।
প্রাকৃতিক দুর্যোগ হলে মহিলাদের বেশি সমস্যা, যেমন হচ্ছে আপনার গর্ভবতী মহিলারা যদি থাকে, ঝড় জলস্তর যেটা হয় সেটা তো আমাদের এখানে তো আপনার টিনের ঘর, যাদের কাঁচা বাড়ি, তা ওখানে তো মহিলাদের রাখা যায় না। তারপর ছোট যারা বাচ্চা তাদেরও রাখা যায় না, পাশে আমাদের সাইকেল সেন্টারে নিয়ে যেতে হয়।
দলগুলোকে একই সাথে অভিযোজন কৌশল হিসেবে উন্নত পদ্ধতিতে দুর্যোগ সহনশীল সবজি চাষ, হাঁস মুরগি ও গবাদি প্রাণী পালনে উৎসাহিত করা হয়।
আমরা মনে করেন এই সমিতিটাও চালাইলাম, পাশাপাশি আমরা নিজেরা হাঁস পালি, মুরগি পালি, টাকা কিছু রোজগার করি, টাকা জমা হয়েছে। 16,000 টাকা দিয়ে ছোট একটা বাছুর গরু কিনছিলাম, অনাল্লাদে আমার 16,000 টাকাতে 6টা গরু হয়েছে।
প্রকল্পের সহায়তায় সরকারি প্রাণী সম্পদ অফিসের সাথে সংযোগ করিয়ে দেওয়ার ফলে সকল প্রকার তথ্য ও ভ্যাকসিন সুবিধা এখন সদস্যরা বাড়িতেই পেয়ে থাকে।
আসলে আমরা যদি জিওএনজি সমন্বয়ে রেখে কাজ করি তাহলে কিন্তু হোলিস্টিক অ্যাপ্রোচ হয় এবং হচ্ছে যে আলটিমেট গোল যেটা এটা সাস্টেনেবল হবে এবং আমার এলাকায় সেটাই হচ্ছে আর কি।
গাইবান্ধার রূপালী বেগম দলের আইজিএ ফান্ড থেকে ঋণ নিয়ে একটি সেলাই মেশিন ক্রয় করে।
মেশিনটা দিয়ে ইনকাম আসতেছে, আমার সংসারটা ভালোভাবে চলতেছে। আগে আমার স্বামীর আশায় থাকতে হতো, যদি এখন আমার স্বামী নাও থাকে তাও আমি এই মেশিনটা দিয়ে চলতে পারি।
মংলা উপজেলার চিলা ইউনিয়নের নারী দলের সদস্যরা প্রকল্প থেকে প্রশিক্ষণ পেয়ে নিজেরাই দলীয়ভাবে সিআরভিএ তৈরি করে ইউনিয়ন ও উপজেলা দুর্যোগ ব্যবস্থাপনা কমিটির সামনে উপস্থাপন করতে সক্ষম হয়েছে। মংলা উপজেলার ঝর্ণা মণ্ডল প্রকল্পের সহায়তা ও প্রশিক্ষণ পেয়ে বাড়ির আঙিনায় পড়ে থাকা জমিতে সবজি চাষ শুরু করে।
প্রকল্প না আসলে এইভাবে আর অতটা আমি আগ্রহী হতাম না। এখন দেখি আসলে এইভাবে করে নিজেও উপকৃত হচ্ছি, পাশে দুজনে দিতে পারতেছি, বিক্রি করে 2 টাকা জমাচ্ছি।
কলাপাড়ার সাইরুন বেগমও ভার্টিক্যাল পদ্ধতিতে সবজি চাষ করে আর্থিক অবস্থার পরিবর্তন করতে পেরেছে।
টাওয়ার পদ্ধতির করছি এই কারণ এটুকুই আমার জায়গা কম, এই অল্প জায়গার ভিতরে আমাকে এটুকু করে খাইতে হয়।
আমাদের ইউনিয়ন পরিষদে আমাদের উপসহকারী কৃষি কর্মকর্তা যারা রয়েছেন তাদের ফোন নাম্বারগুলো দেওয়া আছে, তারা সেখানে যাচ্ছে, উপসহকারী কৃষি অফিসার তাদেরকে ফোন করছে, উপসহকারী কৃষি অফিসার তাদের সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ করে একবারে তার বাড়িতে তার খামারে চলে যাচ্ছে।
ম্যান্ডেলা চাকমা দলীয় ফান্ড থেকে ঋণ নিয়ে পড়ে থাকা পাহাড়ি জমিতে সবজি চাষ শুরু করে। এখন উৎপাদিত সবজি থেকে পরিবারের চাহিদা মেটে, একই সাথে বাজারে বিক্রি করে সে পরিবারের ব্যয়ভার বহন করে। বান্দরবানের দুর্গম পাহাড়ের মেনুলুংপাড়া, সেখানে 26টি ম্রো পরিবারের বসবাস। দূরের পাহাড়ি ঝিরি থেকে নারীরাই জল বয়ে আনার কষ্টকর কাজটি করত।
Taching dong ang temhania nang ingko tui tong bom dwa yung kha maning na ning khe tlen tmi khe taching dong wei de khe anh bom me ka tui doi chat dong cham tong spa ka dit cha lu pa doi ko mat nom nam ho yung atu ngong chang ing piak ngong chang ani ngong chang kam takla।
সাফল্যের মূল্যায়নে বলা যায় মাঠ পর্যায়ে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রভাব মোকাবেলা করে মানুষ এখন অর্থনৈতিকভাবে স্বাবলম্বী।
Thank you, everyone. So, Apa, this is the presentation video documentation of our last phase projects, impact documentation. We did it in last 6 months before. So we presented here this one. Thank you.
Now, may I request the other video documentary? I think Noor Elahi from ICAD is going to show us a documentary. Noor Elahi, please.
No, Appa, only one documentary you have.
Hocche na?
We have only one documentary. We shared it with ICAD. If you face any problem, then ICAD supposed to do that. So we have already shown it.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you, Asan. So now I'm going to invite the next panelist, Dr. Fazle Rabbi Sadek Ahmed, Deputy Managing Director, PKSF. Please, Dr. Fazle Rabbi, could you come and make your intervention? Thank you. Is he here? হ্যাঁ, আপনাকে আনমিউট করতে হবে ডক্টর ফাজলে রাব্বি। আই থিংক উনি মিউট করে
Thank you.
আসেন আপনি। Thank you so much.
And thank you, Ms. Banusri, for your excellent presentation, and Dilruba Haidar for your comments as panelist. In fact, I was listening your comments and presentation as well, and the video documentary. In fact, to some extent, the title of today's today's seminar is something different. It's human rights-based climate change adaptation or climate change impacts. In fact, if we consider the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was approved in the 1948, human rights means many things. As a person, as a man, as a body, actually, every human being is independent from his birth and equal to all. But practically what is happening actually, lots of differentiation, discrepancies, abusing of rights, this and that. But our focus today is climate change and human rights. In fact, Bangladesh is least developed country as well as one of the most climate vulnerable country in the world. In fact, the whole country is climate vulnerable. We have flood-prone areas, flood-prone areas, cyclone and coastal areas, hilly areas, drought-prone areas. The basic impact of climate change is temperature rise, glacier melting, and erratic behavior of rainfall, something like that. It impacts on floods, cyclone, storm surge, riverbank erosion, drought. Everywhere we felt this impact. Actually, in fact, the flood, drought, it was before as well. But nowadays, it is erratic. It is not in a regular fashion, and the intensity and frequency is higher than before. And the consequent impact on various factors, for example, in agricultural sector, fisheries, livestock, in our communication system, infrastructure, health, and ultimately it impacts the people. How it is impacts is people as a whole, all over the world, but particularly vulnerable country, and in a vulnerable country, the marginalized, the women, children, the disabled, the older people, and the poor people are mostly impacted. For example, Madam Dilruba already said what happened when a disaster happened. The government, the people, some NGOs and other agencies tries to give them flood shelter or cyclone shelter. Even in their own household, they cannot survive or cannot live, so they go. But what is happening there? My experience in the time of Aila and Sidor, I was working in the disaster management and relief ministry. I found some adolescent girls, they even cannot use, and they were not willing to use the toilet facility for 2-3 days. Not a single. Why? Because they don't have that facility. They don't have the security to use that. Almost in everywhere, although we have some flood shelter or cyclone shelter, but not enough adequate facilities for women or adolescent girls or even pregnant lady or lactating mother, old person. We don't have that. In fact, human rights, if you say, human rights means livelihood, means their food, education, everything. But it is true that we are failing to provide even a normal situation as a human being, every human being in this country. But during the disaster, during the climate change disaster, if you go during the time of disaster of the affected areas, the scenery is really bad to worse. Even some people, even women, they took shelter at the top of their homestead, top of their shelter for few days during the flood period. For many days they stay in the embankment or some kind of rest areas without any facility, even no food and not adequate for water and shelter. But one thing I want to highlight: water is one of the basic thing which every every people is right to get it easily. Bangladesh is riverine country. Water is everywhere. But look at the scenario in coastal areas, particularly for women and girls. They have to go for few kilometer for two. It's very normal to collect water. That means in every day, some amount of 2, 3, 5 hours they spend only to collect water and provide that water to the members of their household. It is very common scenario in coastal areas. And in other drought-prone areas, particularly lean period, winter period, almost so far my experience, almost 80 to 90% normal tube well is unoperative. And they face again problem. Flood-prone areas, when there is flood, water is everywhere at that time, but they are not getting drinkable water. Just I'm highlighting the water issue and other so many issues. As on sanitation, we already talked about that. Regarding that, actually, what is happening in the global level, if you see in the conference of parties, climate change conference, this and that, there is some important provisions already adopted that the whole world, the countries cooperate each other to support the basic human necessities, to support the basic human rights, and particularly responsibility lies with the developed countries. And for that, they're supposed to give the vulnerable country and the impacted countries with technological support and financial support. But practically, it is not happening. For example, the developed countries supposed to give every year $100 billion for climate change affected countries, but practically it is not happening. Even it is very, even the last two COPs, the conference of parties, they made a decision that the global community will totally aggrieved on the performance of the developed countries to provide technological support and financial support to the vulnerable countries. So in a nutshell, we can say climate change is a global problem. It is impacted developing, least developed countries everywhere. Developed countries, they have their own capacity to address their own problem. They have technological know-how, they have financial capability, but other countries, they are the citizen of the global community. So every country, the developed should cooperate each other, and the developed countries should take the lead to make this world habitable, and habitable for the particularly vulnerable countries, habitable for the marginalized people, habitable for the women and children, disabled and older people. Thanks again for the organizer of Manusher Jonno Foundation, Madam Shaheen Anam, and others to invite me in this August gathering. Thanks to all. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fazli Rabbi, for your intervention, for your very, very important points made. We now have a question-answer session, but we don't have too many questions. I've seen that somebody has asked if UN Women has any project in the climate vulnerable areas. Dilruba, would you like to answer that? Dilruba.
Yes, sorry, Amar, there is some construction work going on, so sometimes you might hear some very bad noise. Yeah, in climate vulnerable areas, we do have projects.
Hello, sorry, I'm in the meeting also.
We are working in 5 districts: Khulna, Satkhira, Jamalpur, Kurigram, and Cox's Bazar. So in 5 areas we are working currently. Thank you.
Okay, and there's just one more question, I think, asking that have youth been engaged in addressing climate change impact? Does anybody, Dhruba or Bonusri or anybody want to answer that? Bonusri, do we, in our project, have we engaged youth or in any other project that you know of? Fazle Rabbi Saib, apniyo, you can also answer if you want.
Okay, may I answer it?
Hey, please.
Okay. Actually, we promote the youth volunteerism and activism at the grassroots level, mostly for the coastal and shore areas. And we also trained the youth volunteers by the project, and they played very vital role in disaster response, especially in the cyclone area. And even we have found that they are playing phenomenal role during the cyclone without any financial support from the project. So it is one of the mandatory engagement of the youth, so that they can respond during the disaster, and especially they have a very wonderful job during the cyclone. Thank you.
May I supplement with Bonusri?
Yes, please.
Actually, we have formed some volunteer groups within coastal hill tracks and shore areas, and we what Bonusri said, we have trained them. We have also linked them with CPP in coastal areas and the Union Disaster Management Committees, so that they can work collaboratively during and after the disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Some people have made statements, and those are not actually questions. There's just one general question that are we really losing out or not thinking of climate change as a kind of a common universal problem? And to that, I would say that I think that there needs to be much more awareness about climate change. In our education system, in the way we live, in the way we lead our lives, our day-to-day lives. I think we must think, because just because we are living in cities and we are not living in coastal areas doesn't mean that climate change, we will not be impacted by climate change. Each and every person, no matter where they live, as we have seen, this year in Europe, the impact of climate change, it was so hot that they had to close down ski resort. I'm sure they never thought of it like that. We always say that we have not been responsible for the if we are not responsible, we have to think of mitigation also. It's not only that we have to think of adaptation. So I think that we must each and every person, all of us, have to think of climate change as a coming disaster, and each one of us have to play a part in trying to mitigate, in trying to adapt, in trying to address those and change our lifestyles a little bit, thinking about the climate change. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, our partners, those who are participating today, my colleagues. I think it was a very, very good discussion. So I'm going to end here now. Thank you, Dr. Fazle Rabbi. সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ জানিয়ে আজকে শেষ করছি।
Thank you, madam. Thank you all.